Do you ever feel like no matter what you do, it's never enough, and that you're living for everybody else's expectations instead of your own, and it's never quite good enough? If you felt this way, you're certainly not alone. It's a rather common phenomenon, and a lot of times it happens where we feel like we have to be a certain way. We have to think like somebody else does, or view things the way that they view them in order to earn their approval, or in order for them to be proud of us. Every single one of us wants the important people in our lives to think well of us, to like us. We want to feel safe with them. A lot of times we want to not care about these things, but unless you're abnormal, unless you don't experience normal human emotions, on some level, everybody wants the approval of the important people in our lives. And a lot of times in the parent-child dynamic and in the spousal dynamic, sometimes even with friends or siblings, this can really create a lot of distress relationally. If you do experience this, or if you have experienced this, where you feel like there's a general disapproval if you have a different political view, or if you pursue a different career than they think that you ought to pursue, or if you have different religious views or feelings, if you feel this general disapproval, how do you find yourself reacting to it? There are several common reactions that people take when that's the case. One is to try to seek that approval. A lot of times we'll try to hide our disagreements or areas where we're not quite on board, and we try to give them, if we think that they want us to be a square, then we try really hard to act like a square, to look like a square, to think like a square, and we'll hold back on what we really think about something, or how we really feel about something. Another common way that people will cope with this is they'll rebel against it, sometimes subconsciously, sometimes very consciously, but they'll intentionally kind of test. So if you feel like you have to I don't know, look a certain way in order to be acceptable, then you might dye your hair, or you might pierce your ears, or get a tattoo, or things that are in obvious direct opposition with what you believe or what the other person has said you need to do in order to gain their approval. And what our brains are trying to do in those moments is this kind of subconscious testing to see, will you still love me? Will you still value me if I'm not playing the game? If I'm not doing the things that I know, or at least I think that you want me to be doing? And then a third way that people often cope with this is to distance themselves from the other person, to try to kind of shut them out of their lives so that we insulate ourselves from the pain. And so we'll avoid interactions, or only interact when we have to. And when we do, try to keep it really light to try to avoid any buttons that might be pushed. I've had clients tell me that their parents will say things very clearly like, I just keep waiting for you to be a different person. Or, that until you stop doing that, or until you start doing this, your life's not going to work well, or he's not going to like you, or, he's going to leave you if you don't do X, Y, and Z. These very overt messages that you have to do certain things, or think certain ways, or be certain ways in order to be acceptable. How do you healthfully manage this dynamic? I want to talk about a couple of specific dynamics around this. One is a personality dynamic, and why this happens a lot of the times relationally. And then another is, how do you cope? What does healthy coping look like in these situations? Believe it or not, the personality of the person whose approval you are seeking can actually be a really big contributor, or the cause why you're feeling like you're constantly having to pursue approval and being good enough in order for them to be proud of you. The E temperament in my core model, E stands for excellence and exactness. And one of the dynamics of the E temperament, or the E personality, is that they tend to be very black and white in their thinking. E's think through things really thoroughly and settle on the best way. That's what motivates the E brain, is trying to figure out what's the best way. What's the best way to live? What's the best way to think? What's the best way to eat? What's the best way to sleep? When the E brain is working, it's trying to figure out the best way to do something. That's what the E brain is really good at. A consequence of that is that the E ends up with a very high level of confidence in the conclusions that they draw. And if you disagree with them, the natural thought process is to think that you're wrong. And it's typically not that you're stupid or that, you're never going to get there. The thought process is typically more like, if you knew what I knew, or if you had these pieces of data that I have, you would also land on this obvious conclusion because it's obviously the correct conclusion. It ends up being kind of more of this almost patronizing feel that you just don't quite get it yet. And so ease in parenting or in spousal relationships or relationships with your partner. Ease have to be really careful to differentiate between sending the message that something could be better rather than it's not good enough. There's a very different message, felt message, received message when the message is, you know what? Yeah, this could be even better than it's not quite good enough. Chances are pretty good if you've been parented by an E or if you're in a relationship with an E that you felt some of this underlying current of, you really kind of need to see things the way that I see them. And it's really hard for the E to not think like that. It's really hard for the E to not think that their way of thinking about something or doing something really is the best way. And so this dynamic can be really punctuated depending on the personalities of the people involved. Another dynamic that I would invite you to consider is how you interpret it. How do you think about these things and the meaning that you assign it? The way that we feel about something at any given time is a function of how we're interpreting that event. If we are assigning the meaning that I'm not good enough because my parent thinks that I ought to be doing this with my life. My parent thinks that I ought to be dating this guy, or that I ought to be staying with this guy, or I really should become a doctor, or I really should be encouraging my kids to do whatever. One of the things I want to point out is that this never goes away. Wanting others to think well of us never goes away. It doesn't matter if you're 6 or 15 or 45 or 70. This doesn't automatically go away. If you're not aware of it and very purposefully managing it, this will be percolating behind the curtain, and your brain will be trying to cope with these feelings throughout your entire life until you stop and confront what's going on and decide how you're going to deal with this. Recognizing the meaning that you're assigning, just making that under that covert process overt is a really powerful piece of this equation. And recognizing, you know what, when I'm around my mom, I am assigning the meaning that she's not happy with what I'm doing. Or I believe that I have to do things the way that she thinks I should do them in order for her to be proud of me. Just unearthing that. In fact, I was on a session with a young adult this morning, and she was talking about that dynamic with her mom. Her mother is an E, and she was talking about the fact that she feels like there are so many complicated layers and nuances in her relationship with her mom, because she also feels closer to her mom than anybody else in her life. And she feels like in so many ways, her mom has been her biggest advocate, her biggest fan. And at the same time, she also, part of her brain feels like in order for her mom to stay pleased with her, she has to keep doing things the way that her mom thinks that she should be doing them. And so it kind of continues to apply this subtle, many times subconscious pressure that you've got to keep jumping through the hoops. You got to keep doing things my way. And that can really create this sort of emotional conundrum, because on a very core level, we don't like feeling like we have to be a certain way in order to be lovable and acceptable. One of the things that you can do is you can have an overt conversation, because chances are also pretty good that your parent or your partner may not even realize that they're sending the message to you that you have to do things the way that they think. And by asking them about it and making that very explicit, a lot of times it can help them to realize some of the messages that they might inadvertently be sending to you. And and it can help clarify what it is that they actually are thinking or are not thinking. And it can help to change that dynamic just by having that conversation. You can also change it by internally confronting the interpretation that you're assigning it. And you can do that just by writing it down. Okay, I don't like how I'm feeling. What is it that I'm feeling? I don't like how I'm feeling. Okay, how am I thinking about this that is making me feel this way? Well, I think that if my mom knew that I was having sex with my boyfriend, she would not be okay with that. Or, you know what? If my mom knew that I was a Democrat, or if my mom knew that I was a Republican or whatever, they would not be okay with that. Just write out whatever that belief is. And just by writing it out and getting it in front of you, your brain can say, well, do I want to give that the power that I'm giving it? And just doing that might be enough. Or, like I said, you might need to follow that up with a conversation. You might have to just reinterpret the fact that, no, if I have to be a certain way in order for my partner to be proud of me, is this a relationship that I want to be in? The point is that this dynamic is very changeable. And by understanding what's going on, you can absolutely do something to make it better. If you're wondering if it's a personality dynamic, click on the link below to take the free assessment, the free core assessment, and you can find out what your personality type is. And you can also find out what your parent or partner's temperament might be. And that might give you some really good insight into start the process into how to actually change this dynamic in your relationship.